Arthur Reed arrived in the town of Redemption with little more than the dust on his coat and $20 to his name. He was an outsider, a man seeking nothing more than a quiet place to start over, away from the ghosts of a past he never spoke of. The town was a single, dusty street carved out of the unforgiving landscape, flanked by a saloon, a general store, and a sheriff's office that looked more weathered than the hills behind it. He was looking for lodging when he saw the notice tacked to the community board, Auction of Property. Lot 17. Cabin and contents. Arrears in tax. Sale at noon. He checked his pocket watch. It was 10 minutes to 12. He found the auction taking place in front of the sheriff's office. The auctioneer, a portly man sweating in the heat, stood on a crate. The crowd was small, a collection of grim-faced locals who watched with an air of detached obligation. When Lot 17 was announced, a strange quiet fell over them. "Do I have an opening bid for this fine cabin, fully furnished, on the edge of town?" the auctioneer boomed, his voice echoing in the silence. Arthur, thinking of his dwindling funds, raised a hand. "I'll bid 25 cents, he said, the amount feeling both bold and foolish. The auctioneer's eyes widened for a moment before his professional mask slipped back on. He looked to the crowd. "A quarter, I have a quarter." No one else moved. No one else spoke. The townspeople looked at Arthur, but their expressions were not of envy or amusement. They were looks of profound, unnerving pity. A few even looked fearful. Going once, going twice. Sold. The gavel fell with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. Arthur was the new owner of a cabin for the price of a shave. As he stepped forward to pay his quarter and receive the deed, the crowd began to disperse, melting away too quickly, their eyes avoiding his. An old man with a cloud of white hair and watery blue eyes paused beside him, leaning close. His breath smelled of tobacco and dust. "You're a fool, son," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle. "Some doors are best left locked." He then shuffled away, leaving Arthur standing alone in the oppressive heat, the deed in his hand feeling less like a prize and more like a curse. Arthur found the cabin a half-mile out of town, nestled in a grove of cottonwoods. It was small and weathered, but the stonework of the chimney was solid, and the roof looked intact. Inside, a thick layer of dust covered everything, muting the colors of a braided rug and casting a gray pall over the simple wooden furniture. It smelled of disuse and secrets. As he propped open the door to let in the stale air, he felt a flicker of pride. It wasn't much, but it was his. He spent the first hour sweeping, the rhythmic scrape of the broom a comfort against the strange feeling the town had given him. He was so engrossed in his work that he didn't hear the approach of a horse until a shadow fell across the doorway. Arthur turned, his hand instinctively resting on the handle of the broom like a weapon. The man standing there was the sheriff. He was tall and lean, with a face that looked permanently tired and a star pinned to a dusty vest. His name, Arthur read on the badge, was Brody. "You the fella who bought this place?" Sheriff Brody asked, his voice flat, devoid of any welcome. Arthur nodded. "Arthur Reed." "I am." The sheriff didn't offer his own name. He just looked around the cabin, his eyes lingering on the floorboards, the fireplace, the single window at the back. "I'll give you $100 for it," Brody said, the offer so abrupt it caught Arthur off guard. "Right now." "Cash." "You take the money and be on the next stage out of town." $100 was a fortune to Arthur, but the offer, combined with the sheriff's grim demeanor, sent a chill down his spine. "Why?" Arthur asked. "That's a generous offer for a place the town sold for a quarter." The sheriff took a step inside, his boots making no sound on the dusty floor. "This cabin has a bad history. A family lived here. They disappeared. Folks around here believe it's cursed." Brody's eyes were hard, unblinking. "It's not a place for outsiders. Take the money, Mr. Reed. It's the best deal you'll get in Redemption." It was more than an offer, it was a threat, veiled in the language of a friendly warning. Arthur's stubbornness, a trait that had both saved and damned him throughout his life, took hold. He had been pushed around his whole life. He wouldn't be pushed now. "I thank you for the offer, Sheriff," Arthur said coolly. "But I think I'll stay." "I'm not a superstitious man." Sheriff Brody stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Have it your way," he said, turning to leave. "Don't say you weren't warned." The sheriff's visit left Arthur with a deep sense of unease. A curse? Disappeared families? It sounded like the stuff of campfire tales, but the look in Brody's eyes had been deadly serious. He tried to dismiss it, to focus on the practical task of making the cabin livable. He moved on to the large, braided rug in the center of the room. It was heavy, far heavier than it should have been, and caked with years of dirt. As he heaved it aside, his boot knocked against something solid. He knelt down, brushing away the thick layer of dust that had accumulated underneath. There, set flush with the floorboards, was the unmistakable outline of a trapdoor. It was made of thick oak, reinforced with iron straps, and secured not with a simple latch, but with a heavy, complex-looking lock built into the wood. The old man's whispered warning echoed in his mind: some doors are best left locked. A prickle of fear, cold and sharp, traced its way up his spine. This was what the sheriff was trying to keep him from finding. This was the cabin's secret. For a moment, he considered leaving it. He could drag the rug back over it, pretend he never saw it, and live in ignorance. But he knew he couldn't. The mystery was a hook that had already sunk too deep. He went to the small tool shed out back and returned with a crowbar and a hammer. The lock was expertly crafted, resisting his initial attempts. He worked at it, the clang of metal on metal ringing out in the quiet cabin. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his knuckles were raw, but he was driven by a grim determination. Finally, with a loud crack of splintering wood, the lock gave way. He pulled the heavy door open. A wave of cool, musty air washed over him, smelling of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly unpleasant. A wooden ladder descended into the darkness below. He lit the lantern he'd found on the mantelpiece, the flickering flame casting long, dancing shadows. Holding it out before him, he peered into the abyss. The light illuminated stone walls and a hard-packed dirt floor about 10 feet down. It was a cellar. Or something more. Taking a deep breath, Arthur swung his legs over the edge and began to descend into the cold, silent dark. The tunnel was more than just a cellar. It was professionally dug, with sturdy wooden beams supporting the ceiling, extending far beyond the cabin's foundation in a single, straight line. The air was cold and still, the only sound the soft crunch of his boots on the dirt floor and the faint hiss of his lantern. A few yards in, he found a stack of wooden crates. Most were filled with mining equipment, pickaxes, shovels, and coiled ropes. But one was different. He pried it open with his crowbar and found it was filled with papers. He lifted one out. It was a surveyor's map of the region, but it was marked with symbols he didn't recognize, tracing a thick, dark line that ran directly beneath the town of Redemption. Underneath the maps was a heavy leather-bound ledger. He opened it. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting. It was a list of names. He recognized some from the auction, the saloon owner, the general store proprietor, even Sheriff Brody. Next to each name was a date and a payment amount, usually a few $100s. At the bottom of each page was a signature, a single initial, T. This was a record of bribery, a conspiracy on paper. The disappeared family must have been the surveyor. He had found something valuable, and someone, T., was paying the whole town to keep quiet about it. Deeper in the tunnel, he found a small, iron box, heavy and locked. He couldn't open it here. He tucked it under his arm, deciding he had seen enough. He needed to get out, to think. As he made his way back towards the ladder, his lantern light glinted off something embedded in the dirt wall. He knelt, scraping away the soil. It was a small, silver locket, tarnished with age. He pried it open. Inside was a faded, miniature portrait of a woman and a small child. The surveyor's family. A wave of cold dread washed over him. This wasn't just about money or land. This was about murder. He scrambled back up the ladder, his heart hammering in his chest, the weight of the iron box and the terrible knowledge it represented pressing down on him. He emerged from the tunnel into the dying light of the afternoon, the cabin's interior now filled with long, ominous shadows. He shut the trap door, but didn't bother to cover it. There was no point in hiding his discovery now. He placed the iron box on the table, his mind racing. What had the surveyor found? And who was the powerful Teague who had bought an entire town silence? He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice the two men enter the cabin until they were already inside, blocking the only exit. One was the saloon owner, a heavy-set man with a florid face and cruel, small eyes. The other was a lanky ranch hand whose hand hovered menacingly close to the pistol on his hip. They were two of the names from the ledger. "Evening," the saloon owner said, his voice a gravelly attempt at friendliness that didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you were settling in. We just came by to make a neighborly offer on the property." He gestured around the dusty room. "Place is a wreck. But we'd be willing to take it off your hands. $500. More than fair. It was the same tactic as the sheriff, but stripped of any pretense. This was not a warning, it was a demand. "I'm not selling," Arthur said, his voice steadier than he felt. He stood protectively in front of the table where the iron box sat. The saloon owner's gaze flickered to the box, then to the exposed trapdoor. The false smile vanished from his face. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Some things in this town are better left alone. The stability of redemption depends on it. You're an outsider, Mr. Reed. You don't know the rules here." The lanky man took a step forward, his eyes cold and empty. "The boss, Mr. Thorne, he doesn't like loose ends. He wants this cabin, and he wants whatever you found in it." So, Teague was Thorne. The name had power. Arthur could feel it in the way the men spoke it. The ticking clock had started. They knew he had found the ledger, the maps. They knew he was a threat. "You should take the offer," the saloon owner pressed. "It's the last one you'll get." Arthur knew if he handed over the box, they would kill him. If he refused, they would kill him. His only chance was to run. Arthur's mind worked frantically. The two men were blocking the door. The single window at the back was his only way out. He had to create a diversion. He feigned a moment of consideration, his eyes cast down. "500, you say," he murmured, taking a slow step toward the fireplace where a heavy iron poker rested. The saloon owner relaxed slightly, sensing a victory. "That's right." Smart manner in one fluid motion, Arthur snatched the poker and hurled it at the lantern on the table. The glass shattered, plunging the cabin into near darkness as flaming oil splashed across the floorboards. The two men shouted in surprise and anger. In that moment of chaos, Arthur lunged for the back window, throwing his shoulder against the old wooden frame. It splintered and broke, and he tumbled out into the cool night air, landing hard on the ground. He didn't pause to check for injuries. He scrambled to his feet, clutching the heavy iron box, and ran into the darkness of the Cartonwood Grove. He could hear them crashing through the cabin behind him, their curses echoing in the night. He ran without a destination, his lungs burning, driven only by pure, animal terror. He had to find help. But who could he trust in a town that had been bought and paid for? Then he remembered the old man at the auction, the one who had tried to warn him. Fitzwilliam. He had looked afraid, but not corrupt. He was the only person who had shown him something other than greed or hostility. Arthur changed direction, circling around the edge of town, staying in the shadows. He found Fitzwilliam's shack at the very end of the street, little more than a pile of scrap wood and canvas. A thin curl of smoke rose from its crooked chimney. He pounded on the flimsy door. "Mr. Fitzwilliam. Please, I need your help." The door creaked open a few inches, revealing a sliver of the old man's fearful face. "Go away," he hissed. "They'll see you. They're already after me." Arthur pleaded, desperation cracking his voice. "You tried to warn me. Please, just tell me what's going on." Fitzwilliam hesitated, his watery eyes darting into the darkness. He saw the terror on Arthur's face, the clutched iron box, and something in him broke. He pulled Arthur inside, barring the door behind him. "You fool," he rasped, his voice trembling. You've stumbled into the dragon's den. The shack was cramped and smelled of wood smoke and old wool. In the dim light of a single candle, Fitzwilliam's face was a mask of fear. You found the surveyor's cellar, he stated, his eyes fixed on the iron box in Arthur's hands. It wasn't a question. Arthur nodded, placing the box on the rickety table between them. His name was Caldwell. A government man. He was sent here 2 years ago to chart the territory. Fitzwilliam's voice was low, conspiratorial. He wasn't here a month before he found it. A vein of silver, richer than anything they've seen in this territory. It runs right under this town. The pieces clicked into place for Arthur. The maps, the payments, the desperation to get him out of that cabin. Thorn, Arthur said. Cassian Thorn. He's behind this. Fitzwilliam flinched at the name. Thorn runs this town, owns it body and soul. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. He offered Caldwell a pittance for his findings and his silence. Caldwell, being an honest man, refused. He was going to file his report with the federal marshal. The old man's gaze drifted into the shadows. A week later, Caldwell, his wife, and their little girl, they were just gone. Thorn told everyone they packed up and left in the night. But we all knew. We all knew what he'd done. The ledger. The names. The entire town was complicit. Why? Arthur asked, his voice raw. Why would you all go along with it? Fitzwilliam let out a bitter, humorless laugh. This town was dying, son. Dying on the vine. Thorn promised us prosperity. He said when the time was right, everyone would get a share. He paid us for our silence, and we were too scared or too greedy to say no. Now we're all caught in his web. Arthur looked down at the box. He needed to open it. He found a small rock and began to hammer at the lock. What's in there? Fitzwilliam whispered. With a final, sharp blow, the lock broke. Arthur lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was Caldwell's official surveyor's seal and a second, much smaller ledger. This one contained a detailed, signed deposition, a full account of his discovery, Thorn's threats, and copies of his correspondence to the U.S. Marshal's Service. It was the proof. It was the truth. It was a death sentence. Arthur knew he was holding a stick of dynamite with a lit fuse. He had two choices, run and hope Thorn's men didn't catch him, or fight. Running felt like a coward's death. His only chance, his only sliver of hope, was to turn the conspiracy against itself. He had to go back to the first man who had tried to get rid of him, Sheriff Brody. He was a man on Thorn's payroll, but he was also a lawman. And Arthur had seen something in his eyes, not just greed, but a deep, weary reluctance. He was a man trapped, not a willing participant. Arthur left Fitzwilliam's shack, clutching the surveyor's deposition. He moved through the back alleys of Redemption, a ghost in the moonlight, until he reached the sheriff's office. He slipped in through the unlocked back door. Brody was sitting at his desk, a bottle of whiskey and a glass before him, staring at the wall. He didn't seem surprised to see Arthur. I told you to leave, Brody said, his voice thick with resignation and alcohol. You should have listened. Arthur tossed the small ledger onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud next to the whiskey bottle. This is Caldwell's sworn testimony, Arthur said, his voice hard. He sent copies to the marshals 2 years ago. They know about the silver, Brody. And when they find his body, they'll know about the murder. Your name is in his notes. Brody's face went pale. He slowly opened the ledger, his hand shaking as he read the dead man's words. The carefully constructed world of lies he had been living in crumbled around him. Thorn promised us, he said no one would ever find out, he whispered, the words catching in his throat. Thorn is an agent for the Transcontinental Railroad, Arthur pressed, guessing at the larger power at play. He's securing the land and the mineral rights before the official survey gets out, isn't he? He's cheating the government, and he used all of you to do it. The sheriff finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and despair. You don't understand. Thorn is not a man you cross. He has ears everywhere. He'll kill us both. He'll kill my family. He'll kill us anyway, Arthur countered, his voice low and intense. "Our only chance is to fight back. You and me. Help me, Sheriff. Help me expose him, and you might just have a chance at redemption." Brody stared at the ledger, then at Arthur. The reluctant watcher was being forced to choose a side. After a long, agonizing silence, he slowly reached for his gun belt and strapped it on. "He's got men watching the telegraph office," Brody said, his voice now firm, "the decision made. But I sent a rider with a message for the federal marshal in Cheyenne 3 days ago. A crisis of conscience. I just don't know if he'll get here in time." Their fragile alliance was forged in the dim light of the sheriff's office. Brody explained that Thorne's ranch was a fortress, heavily guarded. A direct assault was suicide. Their only advantage was the cabin and the tunnel beneath it. It was the one place Thorne didn't fully understand. "Thorne will come for that box," Brody said, his voice grim. "He won't trust his men to handle it now that I've turned. He'll come himself." They made their way back to the cabin under the cover of darkness, two ghosts moving through a town that was now their prison. The air was thick with tension, every rustle of leaves, every distant dog's bark sounding like an approaching threat. They re-entered the cabin through the broken window and immediately began to prepare. They barred the door and windows, using the heavy wooden furniture as barricades. Brody checked his revolver and the rifle he'd taken from his office, laying out boxes of ammunition on the floor. Arthur, armed with the surveyor's old shotgun, felt a strange calm settle over him. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overlaid with a sharp, clear sense of purpose. He was no longer just running, he was making a stand. "Caldwell's maps," Arthur said suddenly, remembering the papers from the crate. "They showed the tunnel extending further. It must connect to the old mine shafts Fitzwilliam mentioned." They lit a lantern and descended back into the darkness. Using the surveyor's detailed drawings, they followed the main tunnel to its end, where it met a wall of loose rock and old timbers. Behind it, according to the map, was the labyrinth of the abandoned silver mine that honeycombed the hills around Redemption. It was a potential escape route, but also a dangerous, unknown variable. As they were studying the map by the flickering lantern light, a sound from above made them both freeze. It was the sound of approaching horses, dozens of them, their hoofbeats a thunderous, terrifying drumbeat. They were coming. Brody looked at Arthur, his face pale but his eyes resolute. "He's here," he said. The ticking clock had run out. The siege was about to begin. The mastermind was at the door, and he was there to bury his secrets for good. They scrambled up the ladder just as the first shout came from outside. "Reed! Brody! I know you're in there. Send out the box, and I might let you live." The voice was cultured, calm, and utterly chilling. It was Cassie and Thorne. Gunshots erupted, splintering the wooden door and shattering the remaining glass in the window frames. Arthur and Brody dropped to the floor, crawling to their positions. The fight for their lives had begun. The cabin became a death trap, a whirlwind of noise, smoke, and flying splinters. They returned fire, not trying to hit anyone, but to keep Thorne's men pinned down, to buy themselves time. The air grew thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. "We can't hold them off forever," Brody yelled over the din of the gunfire. "The mine shaft is our only chance." They needed a diversion. Arthur looked at the shattered lantern and the pool of oil on the floor. An idea, desperate and dangerous, formed in his mind. He grabbed a spare oil lamp, lit it, and threw it towards the front of the cabin. The spilled oil ignited with a whoosh, and a wall of flame shot up, consuming the barricade at the door. Thorne's men outside yelled in alarm as fire and smoke began to billow from the cabin. Under the cover of the chaos, Arthur and Brody retreated down the ladder into the tunnel, pulling the trapdoor shut just as the flaming remnants of the main door crashed inwards. They could hear the shouts and confusion from above as they raced down the dark tunnel toward the mine entrance. They worked frantically, pulling away the loose rocks and timbers that blocked the way. With a final heave, they broke through into a larger, cavernous space. They were in the mine. Using Caldwell's map and the faint light of their one remaining lantern, they navigated the treacherous, collapsing tunnels. It was a terrifying journey through the heart of the earth. The map showed one shaft that led directly beneath Thorne's own ranch house, an old ventilation shaft Caldwell had discovered. It was their in-game. They emerged, covered in dirt and grime, into a small storage cellar beneath Thorne's kitchen. They could hear the confident voices of his men above, believing them to be trapped and burned in the cabin. The hunter had become the hunted. As Thorne himself rode back to his ranch, confident in his victory, Arthur and Brody stepped out of the shadows, guns raised. The look of utter shock on the mastermind's face was broken by the sound of a dozen more horses riding into his courtyard. A man with a silver star on his chest, a federal marshal, dismounted. "Cassie and Thorne," the marshal's voice boomed, "you're under arrest." Brody's rider had made it after all. Justice had arrived, not a moment too soon. In the aftermath, the entire sordid conspiracy unraveled. With Thorne arrested and Caldwell's deposition in the hands of the U.S. Marshals, the townspeople of Redemption were forced to reckon with their complicity. The Transcontinental Railroad Company, implicated by Thorne's confession, was forced into a massive settlement with the government. The rich silver vein was placed under federal control, its profits destined to build schools and hospitals, not to line the pockets of corrupt men. The town of Redemption, ironically, was finally given a chance to live up to its name. Arthur Reed, the unknowing outsider who had bought a cabin for a quarter, became a local legend. He was offered a substantial reward, but he turned most of it down, asking only for the clear title to the cabin he had fought for. He had arrived seeking a quiet place to start over, and in the crucible of fire and conspiracy, he had found it. The ghosts of his past were finally silenced, replaced by the hard-won peace of a man who had faced down evil and chosen to stand his ground. He had learned that a home isn't just a place you buy, it's a place you fight for, a place you earn. And sometimes, the most cursed ground can offer the greatest chance for a new beginning. We hope you enjoyed this thrilling story of suspense and justice in the Old West. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, as it really helps our channel grow. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another one of our narrative adventures. We have new stories coming out every week, and we can't wait to share them with you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.